He was arrested right in the middle of class, in front of everyone. What they didn't know was he'd been doing this for 10 years. And one student finally decided to stop him. Stay with me, because this isn't just about justice. It's about what happens when silence ends and the truth fights back. Claire Thompson had always found comfort in the spaces between things, between the chaos of dining halls and the quiet hum of library stacks, between lectures and late-night study sessions, between the loud personalities and her own soft-spoken nature. At Sierra State University in Southern California, she walked a familiar path each day, psychology textbooks hugged to her chest, earbuds in, journal always tucked under her arm. She was the kind of student professors appreciated, smart, observant, punctual, but not the kind anyone paid too much attention to. Not because she lacked brilliance, but because she preferred to occupy the edges, where things were quieter, slower, more honest. Dr. Richard Allman, on the other hand, was impossible to miss. He was one of the youngest tenured professors in the department, known for his dynamic lectures, tailored suits, and the kind of voice that made even the driest material feel alive. Students gravitated to him, not just for his academic rigor, but for how he made them feel seen, heard, validated. He remembered names, commented on class contributions,
and made each student feel like they mattered.
Rumor had it that working with Allman opened doors to grad schools and prestigious internships. His recommendation letter was considered a golden ticket. So when he personally selected Claire to mentor for her junior research project, she felt a swirl of emotions, disbelief, pride, and a twinge of nervousness she couldn't quite explain. "You're the kind of mind we need more of in this field," he'd said the day he approached her after class. His tone was warm, fatherly even. And the way he smiled made her stomach flutter, not from attraction, but from something else. Something harder to name. Their first meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in his office. A quiet space tucked behind the psychology wing, far from student foot traffic. Claire arrived 5 minutes early, her notes neatly clipped in a folder. Heart racing with both anticipation and anxiety. She stood outside his office door, checking her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, wondering if she looked too eager. "Come in, Dr." Allman said, standing to greet her. He offered her a chair across from his desk and a cup of tea, which she politely declined. As he closed the door behind her, she noticed how softly the latch clicked into place, a sound so subtle it made her skin prickle. The meeting started innocently enough. They reviewed her research proposal on social cognition and trauma response. He offered thoughtful feedback, nodding as she spoke, occasionally scribbling notes. His office smelled faintly of cedar and bergamot, and a jazz playlist played low in the background. "You have a natural curiosity," he said after a pause. "And a presence. That's a rare combination." Claire smiled, unsure how to respond.
"Thank you," she managed.
He stood and walked behind her to glance over her shoulder at a paragraph in her notes. As he leaned over to point something out, his arm brushed hers. She noticed how close he'd gotten, closer than necessary. The edge of his sleeve grazed her forearm. She tensed slightly, waiting for him to move. But he didn't. The moment lingered. Then, as if nothing had happened, he returned to his seat. The conversation resumed, but the air had changed. There was a charge she couldn't explain, an alertness in her spine she couldn't shake. Later, as she stood to leave, he placed a hand on her shoulder, firm, grounding, but too familiar. It wasn't overt. It wasn't aggressive. But it wasn't right. "Looking forward to our next session," he said, eyes holding hers just a bit too long. Claire walked out with a strange tension in her chest. Her logical mind said it was nothing. That he was just warm, tactile, European maybe. But there was something in the lingering weight of his touch that stayed with her long after she returned to her dorm. She didn't feel harmed, exactly, just displaced, like she'd been nudged off balance and hadn't found her footing yet. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Meeting with Dr. A felt weird, not bad, just strange, too close. Or maybe it's just me being paranoid. I don't want to ruin this opportunity over nothing." She didn't mention it to anyone. Not yet. Because what could she say? He hadn't done anything, not really. He had smiled, complimented her, encouraged her work. He had also closed the door and stood too close and touched her shoulder like he had every right to. But maybe that was just how mentorship worked. Maybe. A week passed. Then, too, Claire met with Dr. Allman again. This time, the blinds were already drawn when she arrived. The tea was steeped, waiting. He greeted her with a smile that lingered just a second longer than appropriate. "You look well-rested," he said, his eyes scanning her face in a way that made her want to look away. "There's a confidence about you that wasn't there before." Claire shifted in her seat. The session was filled with the usual academic talk, data sets, ethics review, theoretical frameworks, but she couldn't ignore the subtle shifts. The praise was more personal, the eye contact too steady, and once again, that hand on her shoulder when she rose to leave. This time, it slipped slightly lower down her back. Back in her dorm, Claire stared at the ceiling, trying to rationalize. He hadn't done anything overt, nothing she could definitively call out. But it was enough. It was always just enough. When Maya, her roommate, walked in, she found Claire curled on her bed, still dressed, face blank. "Hey," Maya said gently. "You okay?"
Claire hesitated.
Then slowly sat up. "Can I ask you something? Did you ever feel uncomfortable around Allman?" Maya froze. "Why are you asking?" Claire's voice trembled. "Because I think he crossed a line today. And I don't know if I'm imagining it." Maya looked away, her jaw tightening. "He did the same to me. Sophomore year. He offered to review my thesis draft. Said I had natural warmth that would make a great therapist. By our third meeting, he was sitting way too close, touching my arm every time he spoke. I dropped the project." Claire's heart sank. "Why didn't you say anything?" Maya gave a dry laugh. "Say what? That a star professor made me feel gross? Who'd believe me? Who would risk their future over that?" That night, Claire didn't write in her journal. She sat with Maya on the floor, their backs against the bed, sharing bits and pieces of stories they hadn't planned to say out loud. For the first time, the weight started to shift. In the days that followed, they started reaching out. Quietly. A friend from class who'd also worked with Allman last year. Another girl Maya knew, who transferred majors after a bad experience. They didn't post anything online. They didn't report anything yet. They just talked and listened. By the end of the week, they had spoken to 4 women. 4. Each story different. Each story the same. The realization settled slowly, painfully. It wasn't about misunderstanding. It wasn't about Claire being sensitive or Maya overthinking. This was a pattern. A quiet one. A careful one. But a pattern nonetheless. And suddenly, silence didn't feel like safety anymore. It felt like complicity. The following Monday evening, the small group of women gathered at Claire and Maya's apartment. The lights were dimmed, as if low lighting could soften the weight of what they were about to discuss. A kettle hissed quietly on the stove, but no one moved to turn it off. The air was thick with apprehension. Questions unspoken. Rachel sat near the window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She'd been the quietest in their earlier discussions, nodding but saying little.
Now.
She looked up with an expression more resolved than any of them had seen before. "I haven't told anyone this, but my dad's a detective," she said, her voice low. "He works major crimes. Sexual assault, mostly. He's been doing it for over 20 years. Maya turned to her, eyebrows raised. "Does he know about Allman? About what happened to you?" Rachel shook her head.
No.
"I didn't want him to look at me like a victim, like someone he couldn't protect. I didn't want to be another file on his desk." Claire's voice was gentle. "But you think he'd help us?" Rachel hesitated. "I do, if I ask. He's not the kind of man who lets things slide." The room fell into a collective pause. They were all thinking the same thing, what it would mean to escalate this. What it would cost. 2 days later, Detective Samuel Briggs walked into Claire and Maya's apartment carrying a worn leather briefcase and the weariness of someone who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, with creases around his eyes that came from squinting too long at the truth and not liking what he found. He didn't speak much at first, just listened. Rachel had called him the night before, voice trembling, and told him it was time she shared something important. Now, he sat at their table, legal pad open, pen poised, while the women took turns recounting their stories. Claire went first, then Maya, then a girl named Elise, who hadn't come forward before but now clutched a teacup with trembling hands. Each story added a new layer, a new pattern, a progression from subtle to sinister, from discomfort to violation. Samuel didn't flinch. He just listened, took notes, asked for dates, details, timelines. When the final silence fell, he folded his hands together. What he's doing, it's strategic, controlled. He's walking the line just enough to avoid suspicion. But that's what makes it dangerous. Claire's eyes burned. So, how do we stop him? We catch him in the act, Samuel said. Legally.
Clearly.
With evidence no one can ignore or explain away. You mean like, wear a wire? Maya asked. He nodded.
Exactly.
You go back in. One of you. We record everything. The words, the body language, the patterns. We let him show who he is. And while that's happening, I'll dig. I've got a guy, cybersecurity expert.
Except for me.
He can help me get access to any digital footprint Almond's left behind. Rachel looked down. What if he finds out? What if he turns this around on us? Then we make sure we're one step ahead, Samuel said. We move carefully. We keep backups. We act only when we're ready. And if your school tries to cover for him, which they might, we go public. There was a long silence. Then Claire straightened in her chair. Her voice didn't shake this time. I'll do it. I'll meet with him. Maya's eyes widened. Are you sure? Claire nodded. I've come this far. I won't stop now. Samuel gave her a look of respect. Then let's get to work. That night, after everyone had gone, Rachel lingered in the hallway as her father packed up his briefcase. I should have told you sooner, she said quietly. Samuel looked up, his face softer now. You told me when you were ready, and I'm proud of you. She stepped forward and hugged him. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel ashamed. Upstairs, Claire sat at her desk, staring at the flickering cursor on her screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began to type. Fear only thrives in silence. But together, we are louder than fear. And this time, she didn't delete the sentence. The week that followed moved both too fast and unbearably slow. Claire found herself caught in an anxious limbo, checking her calendar, rehearsing what she would say, trying to quiet the rising panic that curled in her chest each time she thought of sitting in Almond's office again. But through it all, she stayed committed. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she finally had something more powerful than fear: purpose. Samuel's contact came through the very next day. His name was Leo Ortiz, a former cybercrimes agent turned freelance digital investigator. He had the kind of laid-back charm that belied how deeply he could unravel someone's digital life. Within an hour of being briefed, Leo was already sketching a plan on the back of a napkin in Claire's kitchen. We'll outfit you with a micro-recorder, audio and video, he explained. Nothing fancy. Just enough to capture anything that crosses the line. Claire nodded, heart pounding. Meanwhile, Leo continued, I'll be working to mirror his university drive. Most profs sync files across campus systems. If he's saved anything questionable, I'll find it. The day of the meeting arrived too soon. Claire dressed with deliberate care. Nothing revealing, but nothing too guarded either. Just enough to feel like herself. She clipped the recording device to the inside of her cardigan, heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted out. Samuel drove her to campus, but parked 2 blocks away. He didn't speak much, just placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before she stepped out. Maya waited outside the building, pretending to scroll through her phone, ready to call for help if anything went wrong. Claire knocked on the office door at precisely 3 p.m. Claire, Dr. Almond greeted her with that same polished smile. Right on time. His office smelled like cedarwood and Earl Grey tea, comforting, deceptive. The blinds were drawn again. Claire took her usual seat across from his desk, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. They began with her research. He asked questions about her methodology, gestured with his pen, nodded thoughtfully. But as the minutes ticked by, the conversation shifted. "You've really grown this semester," he said, voice softer now. "There's something very grounded about you. It's rare." Claire offered a tight smile. "Thank you. I've had a lot of help." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You know," he began slowly, "mentorship isn't always just about the research. Sometimes it's about opening doors, knowing when to invest in the right people." Claire felt the air shift. The room, once only uncomfortable, was now heavy with implication. "I appreciate your support," she said, keeping her tone even. He stood, walked around the desk, and perched on its edge, closer now. "Support is just the beginning, Claire. I see a lot in you. More than most. And I'd hate to see that potential wasted." When his hand moved to brush hers, Claire didn't pull away, not yet. The camera caught everything, the proximity, the tone, the touch. "I want to see you succeed," he continued. "But you have to trust me." Claire finally stood, her chair scraping softly against the rug. "I think we've covered enough for today. I'll update the draft and send it by Friday." There was a flicker in his eyes, surprise? Annoyance? But he recovered quickly. "Of course," he said. "I look forward to it." Claire walked out, each step feeling like a victory. Outside, Maya was already texting Samuel. Within minutes, they met in a small parking lot nearby. Claire handed over the recording device with shaking fingers. "He did it," she whispered. "He said everything." Leo uploaded the footage immediately. Samuel reviewed it silently, jaw tightening. Every word, every gesture was clear. Not explosive, but unmistakable. Then Leo's voice rang from across the room. "Got something." Everyone turned. He rotated his laptop to face them. On the screen was a series of folders. Recently deleted, but recovered. Hidden behind layers of innocuous names were dozens of files, documents, images, even screen recordings. "Some of these are dated years back," Leo said. "Different campuses. Different students. He's been at this a long time." Rachel, standing behind Claire, whispered, "He recorded them, just like he did to us." Samuel closed his notebook. "Now we've got him. And it's just the beginning." That night, Claire sat on the floor of her room, phone in hand, eyes wide open. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what might happen next. She was ready. Leo worked through the night. What began as a simple mirroring of Richard Allman's University Drive had grown into a full-scale excavation of years of buried digital debris. The man had been meticulous, organized folders, encrypted archives, false file names. But Leo had seen it all before. Predators always thought they were clever until someone smarter came along. By morning, they had a directory of files stretching back nearly a decade. Most were videos, poorly labeled, and deeply disturbing. Allman had recorded conversations with students, some seemingly harmless, others filled with suggestive undertones, and several that crossed lines so clearly they left the room silent. Samuel was pacing, arms crossed, as Leo loaded a time-stamped folder labeled STL_2013. "That's St. Luke's," Leo muttered. He taught there as a visiting professor for one semester. A name jumped out, Amelia Hart. Claire's breath caught. "I've heard that name. Wasn't she missing?" Samuel's jaw clenched. "She was found dead. It was a case I worked. We never found enough evidence to pin anyone. But she'd gone to a faculty advisor for help before she disappeared. And that advisor was Allman." The room turned cold. Leo clicked open a subfolder labeled H_MedPsych, and they watched in silence as a video began. It showed Amelia, young, bright-eyed, sitting across from Allman in a familiar-looking office. His voice, gentle and reassuring, was unmistakable. He asked her about stress, about sleep patterns, about her family. And then his questions turned personal, invasive. Claire turned away halfway through. Maya grabbed the laptop and closed it. "We don't need to see more. It's him," Rachel whispered. "This was never just about us. He's been doing this for years, getting better at hiding." Samuel sat heavily in a chair. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, he said, "We need to act.
Now.
Not just with the university, with the DA. This goes beyond misconduct. This is criminal." Over the next 48 hours, the pieces came together quickly. Samuel presented the findings to a former colleague now working in the district attorney's office. The recordings, the file names, the timestamps, everything lined up. He brought in a digital forensics team to verify authenticity. Claire and the others wrote sworn affidavits. They gave testimony. The university, when informed, initially froze. Their legal team scrambled. But once the DA's office got involved, the tone shifted. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Statements were drafted. Public relations prepared for impact. Meanwhile, more evidence emerged. Emails, forum posts, complaints that had been buried or quietly dismissed. Allman had moved from institution to institution just before complaints escalated. Each time, he left behind a trail of unresolved suspicions. Leo traced back nearly 7 different schools. Allman's record, once pristine, was now a minefield of predatory patterns. Back in Claire's apartment, the group met again. There was a stillness in the room. Not peace, but clarity. Something had shifted. The weight wasn't gone, but it was no longer just theirs to carry. "He thought he could keep moving," Claire said quietly. "That he could always stay one step ahead." Samuel nodded. But he stayed too long, left too many scars. And now he's cornered. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. For the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like change. The past wasn't erased. But now it was no longer invisible. It was a Wednesday morning when the arrest was planned. Claire didn't sleep the night before. Her eyes burned from hours of staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of her last meeting with Allman. Her heart beat with a heavy rhythm of anticipation and dread, and when dawn came, she dressed slowly, deliberately, like someone stepping into a new version of themselves. Samuel called just before sunrise. "It's happening today. First class. We'll be there before he arrives. You don't have to be." But she did. Claire met Maya and Rachel outside the lecture hall. The campus was already stirring, sleepy students trickling in, coffee cups in hand, earbuds in place. Everything looked normal. But today was anything but. Inside the hall, students filled the seats like every other class day. Claire took her usual spot, 3rd row, center, while Maya sat beside her, eyes darting between the door and the clock. Rachel positioned herself near the back, quiet but resolute. When Allman entered, he carried the same leather briefcase, wore the same crisp blazer, and smiled that same practiced smile. "Good morning, everyone. Let's get started." He didn't get the chance. The door opened again. Samuel walked in first, his badge visible on his belt. Behind him were 2 plainclothes officers. Their presence shifted the room instantly. Whispers rose. Phones appeared. Claire's breath caught in her throat. "Richard Allman," Samuel said clearly, voice echoing through the lecture hall. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of sexual misconduct, unlawful surveillance, and criminal obstruction in an ongoing investigation. You have the right to remain silent." The rest blurred. Claire watched as Allman's face transformed, confusion, then disbelief, then rage. "This is ridiculous. I have tenure. You can't." "Hands where we can see them," one officer said calmly. Cuffs clicked. Gasps spread across the room. For a moment, Claire couldn't move. Her hands trembled. Her vision blurred. But when she turned to Maya, Maya was already looking at her and nodding. They stood together. Outside, a crowd had already begun to gather. Word traveled fast on campus. Students who had once admired Allman now watched in stunned silence as he was led down the front steps. Claire didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The evidence would speak. The other women would speak. The recordings, the files, the history that had once been buried would rise to the surface, undeniable. Later that day, the university issued a statement. Brief, formal, designed to protect its reputation. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement regarding the investigation into Professor Richard Allman. We take student safety seriously and encourage anyone with relevant information to come forward. It felt hollow, but at least it was something. The emails started pouring in that evening, anonymous messages from former students, staff members. Even one professor who had always found Allman's behavior off but hadn't wanted to rock the boat. By nightfall, Allman's name was trending locally. A photo of him in handcuffs was circulating on campus Twitter accounts. The silence that had protected him for so long was breaking open. At home, Claire sat in her room, knees pulled to her chest. As Maya read the messages aloud. Thank you for speaking up. I didn't think anyone else noticed what he did to me. You're so brave. I wish I'd done what you did. Claire wiped away tears she hadn't realized had formed. Not from sadness. From relief.
From release.
Samuel texted her one sentence. He won't hurt anyone else. And for the first time in a long time, Claire believed it. The days after the arrest were a strange blend of stillness and momentum. Classes continued, professors lectured. Students took notes, but something intangible had shifted. Whispers turned into conversations. Silences began to break. Claire kept her head down. Not because she was ashamed, but because the flood of attention felt like too much. People approached her in the cafeteria, in hallways, on her way to the library. Some just nodded in silent solidarity. Others stopped to speak. I saw the news, one girl said softly, eyes rimmed with red. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. Another girl, younger, clutched her sleeve in passing and whispered, he did it to me too. I thought I was crazy. Every word was like a thread, slowly sewing up something torn open inside Claire. She began attending weekly therapy sessions offered by the university's counseling center, now suddenly funded and fully staffed. She didn't talk much at first, just sat with the weight of everything. But slowly, the words came. I feel like I'm breathing with lungs that weren't mine before, she told her counselor. Like someone else's courage crawled into me and said, you don't have to be quiet anymore. Meanwhile, Maya launched the podcast she'd been planning for months. It was called Unbroken Voices. The first episode featured Claire's voice, anonymized but powerful. In it, she spoke about boundaries, about fear, about reclaiming narrative. The podcast spread faster than they expected. Students from other campuses began sending in audio clips. Survivors. Allies. Some anonymous. Some proud to be named. Rachel announced she was applying to law school. I want to be the person in the courtroom next time, she said. Not just someone who lived it. Someone who can change it. Leo offered to help the DA's office full-time. Samuel started holding information sessions on how to recognize and report misconduct, packed rooms every time. For a while, Claire didn't return to Allman's building. It was too much. But one late afternoon in spring, she walked through the psychology wing alone. The hallways were quiet, but not haunted anymore. Just familiar. Outside his old office, the nameplate was gone. The door stood open, a janitor inside, repainting the walls. The space was being reassigned. Claire lingered for a moment, then smiled. She kept walking. Later that week, she stood on a small stage at a campus open mic night. Not many knew she was speaking. She hadn't planned to, but as the microphone passed through the crowd, something in her hand rose before her brain caught up. When she spoke, her voice didn't shake. There are wounds that stay hidden because they don't bleed, she said. But we carry them. In our breath, in our silence, in the way we look at doors before we knock. This story isn't about revenge. It's about truth. About refusing to carry someone else's shame. She looked out into the dim room and saw faces lit with knowing. I used to think silence was safety. Now I know it was a cage. And today I'm walking free. The room erupted into applause. Not loud, but long. That night, Claire fell asleep without music, without white noise, without the lights on. And when she dreamed of a room full of voices, all rising, none alone. Graduation day arrived like a quiet sunrise. There was no fanfare in Claire's heart, no roaring celebration. Just a steady calm that settled over her like a well-worn blanket, familiar, grounding. The campus buzzed with families, camera flashes, and voices wrapped in excitement. The quad was decked in rows of white chairs and navy banners, the Sierra State emblem catching sunlight in every corner. Claire stood among her classmates, cap pinned securely, eyes searching the crowd. She spotted them almost instantly: Maya, Rachel, Samuel, and Leo, seated together in the front row of guests. Maya waved, grinning. Rachel gave her a small, proud nod. Samuel, arms crossed, smiled the way only a father could. And Leo was already adjusting his phone, ready to record. Claire's name was third to last on the valedictorian roster. She listened to the speeches before her with a distant hum in her ears. Words about perseverance, excellence, resilience. Good words. Safe words. But when she stood and approached the podium, the applause faded into a quiet anticipation. She gripped the edges of the lectern and took a breath. Today, we talk about success, she began. About goals achieved, degrees earned, paths just beginning. But there's another kind of success we don't often name: surviving.
Speaking.
Refusing to be erased. The crowd stilled. A hush fell over the sea of caps and gowns. I came to this university hoping to learn how to help others, Claire continued. But I ended up learning how to help myself first. I learned that silence is a survival instinct. But eventually, it becomes a prison. And freedom, real freedom, begins with truth. She paused, scanning the audience. I'm standing here today not because I was never afraid, but because I refused to stay afraid. A breeze lifted the edge of her gown as she leaned in. To anyone out there who's still afraid, know this: you are not alone. There is power in your voice. There is healing in your story. And there is strength in the moment you decide to speak. Maya wiped her eyes. Rachel reached for her hand. Samuel tilted his chin up, proud. Leo's camera never wavered. Claire ended simply. Thank you. The applause was thunderous. It wasn't polite. It was real. After the ceremony, students and faculty swarmed. Some thanked her. Others just hugged her. Survivors she didn't know whispered their stories, often for the first time. Back in her dorm, Claire packed slowly. Her room, once filled with anxiety and notebooks full of unsent words, now felt like a cocoon she was finally ready to leave. On her desk, a printed email sat folded, a response from a nonprofit in D.C. offering her a job supporting advocacy for campus survivors. She smiled. Her story wasn't ending. It was expanding. That night, she sat on the same steps where her journey had begun, staring out over the darkened campus. Behind her, footsteps approached. Maya sat beside her. So, she said, ready for the next chapter? Claire looked at the sky, stars beginning to peek through. Not just ready, she said. Finally free to write it. And, together, they sat in silence. Not the kind that hides things. The kind that holds space for everything to come.